It's been a year since Zanil opened her foundation, and life finally feels like it's hers again. Every morning, sunlight spills across her small apartment, catching the green leaves of the plants she's somehow managed to keep alive. The place hums with warmth. Friends drop by for dinner, music fills the air, and laughter replaces the silence that used to feel so heavy. She's doing well. People in the community respect her. Her work is making real change. For the first time in years, she's not surviving, she's living. But at night, when the city quiets down, something softer settles in. Sometimes she wakes up from dreams where her mother's voice is calling her name, gentle but distant. It's strange. She's free now, far from the shouting, the guilt, the constant fear of never being enough. Still, there's a part of her that misses the familiarity of it all, even the chaos. Freedom feels good, yes, but it also feels lonely in ways she can't quite explain. She waters her plants, checks her phone, scrolls through photos of smiling women her foundation has helped, and reminds herself that she's built this life with her own hands. Still, every now and then, she catches herself wondering what her mother would say if she saw her now, proud maybe, or still disappointed. Zanil doesn't know. She only knows that healing is quieter than she expected, and sometimes, even peace has an echo. It was a warm afternoon when Zanil found the letter waiting on her doorstep. No envelope, no return address, just her name written in Kweku's uneven handwriting. She hadn't seen his handwriting in years, but she recognized it immediately. Her stomach tightened before she even opened it. When she finally did, the words were sharp and cold. "Mama is sick. Don't bother coming." That was it. No greeting, no signature. Just that. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the paper. The handwriting felt angry, rushed, like the words were meant to hurt. She folded it up and tucked it into a drawer, telling herself she wouldn't think about it. She'd learned to protect her peace, to walk away from that old cycle of guilt and manipulation. For years, every mama is sick had meant something else, a way to pull her back, to make her feel responsible again. So she left the letter there, unopened in her mind, and went on with her week. But the thought wouldn't go away. At work, she found herself reading the same sentence in an email 3 times, her mind drifting back to those 5 words. At night, while brushing her teeth, she caught herself wondering how sick her mother really was. The sound of her mother's voice, the same one that still haunted her dreams, echoed faintly in her memory. Was it real this time? Or was Kweku trying to play her again, the way he always did? She tried to reason it out. Her mother had chosen pride over peace so many times before. And Kweku, he'd always known how to twist guilt into control. Still, something in Zanil's chest felt heavy, uneasy. What if she ignored it and something truly happened? What if this time her mother did need her? 3 nights later, she found herself sitting at the kitchen table with the letter unfolded again, the paper now soft from her hand. She read the words over and over until they blurred. "Don't bother coming." It almost sounded like a challenge, like Kweku knew she wouldn't be able to stay away. He always knew which buttons to press. Zanil sighed and leaned back in her chair. Her apartment was quiet, too quiet. The plants on the windowsill looked peaceful, untouched by any of this family chaos. She thought about the women her foundation helped, women who had walked away from broken homes and started over. She'd told them healing meant setting boundaries. But now, sitting alone with her brother's bitter words, she realized boundaries don't erase love. They just make it complicated. By the 4th night, she'd made up her mind. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was brave. But she couldn't ignore the feeling that she needed to see for herself. She packed a small bag, slipped the letter into her pocket, and whispered to the empty room. Just for a few days. She didn't know what she'd find back home. Forgiveness, regret, or more pain. But she knew one thing. She was strong enough now to face it. The taxi slowed as it turned onto the old street, and Zanil felt her chest tighten. Everything looked smaller than she remembered. The mango tree at the corner, the cracked pavement, the low wall covered in dust. When she stepped out, the air smelled faintly of smoke and rain. The house stood in front of her, quiet and worn down, like it had been holding its breath for years. The paint on the gate had peeled away, revealing patches of rust. The windows were open, but no sound came from inside. For a long moment, she just stood there, her bag in hand. This was the place she had once dreamed of escaping, and now she was back. Not as the scared girl she used to be, but as a woman who had built a new life. Still, her legs felt heavy as she walked toward the door. The front room was almost empty. The old wooden chairs were still there, but the cushions had lost their shape. The smell of dust and disinfectant filled the air. A few family photos hung crooked on the wall, their colors faded. One photo caught her eye, her mother smiling proudly, her arm around a younger Zanil at her graduation. The sight made her throat tighten. "Zanil." The voice came from the back room, soft but unmistakable. She followed it, her heartbeat quickening. Her mother lay on a narrow bed, covered with a thin blanket. Her face looked smaller now, the strong features gentler but tired. Her hair, once thick and dark, had thinned to wisps of gray. But her eyes, sharp, searching, were the same. "You came," her mother whispered, her voice trembling between surprise and relief. Zanil nodded slowly. "Yes, Mama." They stared at each other for a moment that felt longer than it was. There were so many things to say, but neither knew where to begin. The silence between them was heavy, filled with old memories and the kind of pain that doesn't fade with time. Zanil placed her bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. She wanted to ask how long her mother had been sick, what the doctors had said, whether Kweku had been taking care of her. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she reached out and adjusted the pillow behind her mother's head. "You shouldn't have come," her mother murmured, looking away. "Maybe not," Zanil said quietly. "But I did." Her mother closed her eyes for a moment, a faint sigh escaping her lips. The fan above them creaked as it turned slowly, filling the room with the soft hum of time passing. Zanil looked around the small room, the chipped dresser, the stack of empty medicine boxes, the worn Bible on the nightstand. Everything here told a story of decline, but also of survival. She didn't know if she had come for forgiveness or duty, but as she sat there, she realized it didn't matter. For now, she was here, and that somehow felt like enough. In the first few days back home, Zanil moved quietly through the house, trying not to stir old ghosts. She woke early to sweep the floor, cook light meals, and check her mother's medicine schedule. She avoided long talks, choosing small gestures instead, changing the bed sheets, trimming the dead flowers by the window, making sure her mother had clean water beside her bed. Her mother didn't say much either, but sometimes, when she thought Zanil wasn't looking, she'd watch her with a soft, tired gaze, half gratitude, half guilt. The peace didn't last long. On the third evening, Kweku showed up. He came in smelling of sweat and cheap beer, his shirt half-buttoned, his smile too wide to be genuine. "Ah, look who finally remembered she has a family," he said, dropping onto the couch like he owned the place. Zanil's chest tightened, but she stayed calm. "I came to see Mama," she said simply. He waved his hand. Of course. But you know, these hospital bills are killing me. I've been doing everything alone since you ran off." His tone carried that familiar edge, guilt wrapped in charm. Zanil looked at him, remembering all the times she had believed those words before. The endless money requests, the broken promises, the excuses. "How much does she owe?" she asked. Kweku didn't hesitate. "A lot. I'll handle it, but I just need some cash to cover today. You can pay me back later if you want." Something in her shifted then, a quiet recognition. She saw through him now, the way she used to see through the women she helped at her foundation when they spoke about the men who drained them dry. Kweku hadn't changed at all. He still used their mother's pain as a weapon, and guilt as currency. Still, she handed him a small amount. Enough for medicine, not enough for trouble. He snatched it, muttered a quick thanks, and left without saying goodbye to their mother. That night, Zanil found the medicine untouched and learned from a neighbor that Kweku had been seen drinking at a bar near the market. The anger came quietly, not like the old days when she'd shout and cry. This time it was a deep, steady heat, the kind that stays. She sat beside her mother, who was half asleep, and whispered, "I can't keep doing this." Over the next few days, Kweku came and went, always with a new story, a new emergency, a new demand. But Zanil no longer reacted. She smiled politely, said she'd think about it, then went on with her work. Each time she said no, it felt like taking back a piece of herself. By the end of the week, Kweku realized his old tricks didn't work anymore. Zanil was still helping their mother, but this time on her own terms. No more guilt, no more being used. She was finally learning the difference between being kind and being controlled, and that lesson, she knew, was worth every moment of pain that brought her here. By the end of the week, Zanil knew something had to change. The tension in the house felt like humidity, heavy and visible, but everywhere. Kweku had stopped pretending to be polite, and her mother had grown quieter, her eyes darting between them like she was watching a storm form. Zanil didn't want another explosion, but she also couldn't keep pretending things were fine. So one morning after breakfast, she told them, "We need to talk." Kweku rolled his eyes immediately. "Ah, here we go. The boss lady has a meeting for us." He leaned back in his chair, smirking, but Zanil didn't take the bait. She simply nodded and gestured for both of them to sit in the living room. The air was thick with silence. Only the slow ticking of the wall clock broke it. She took a breath and started calmly, her tone even. "I've been thinking about how we can make sure Mama gets proper care," she said. "From now on, I'll pay the hospital directly. The doctors, the pharmacy, everything will go through them. Not through you, Kweku." Her brother's smile disappeared. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped. "It means," she said softly, "I don't want any confusion or mistakes. This way, Mama gets what she needs, and no one has to fight about money." Kweku slammed his hand on the table. "So you don't trust me? After everything I've done for her?" Zanil looked at him, her voice still calm. "I trust you to be you, and I trust myself to protect my peace." That only made him angrier. You think you're better than us now. Ever since you got that fancy job and your little foundation, you've been acting like a saint. You don't even live here anymore. Mama Thembai stirred on the couch, her hands trembling. Please don't fight, she whispered. Zanil, he's just... But Zanil shook her head gently. No, Mama. This isn't a fight. I'm not angry. I just want things to be clear. She turned to Kweku. I'll help. You know I will. But I won't be used. Not again. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The firmness in it carried more weight than shouting ever could. For a moment, no one spoke. The fan buzzed softly above them, and outside, a rooster crowed like nothing important was happening at all. Kweku finally stood up, muttering something under his breath. He didn't look at her as he left the room, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the quiet house. Zanil exhaled slowly and turned to her mother, who sat with tears pooling in her eyes. You don't have to choose sides, Mama, she said gently. I just need peace in this house for you and for me. Her mother nodded faintly. Zanil stood up, straightened her shoulders, and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear after days of gray. For the first time, she felt that same lightness inside her, not because everything was fixed, but because she had finally drawn the line and stood by it. The days that followed were quieter. Kweku had stopped coming around, at least for now, and the house finally felt still again. Zanil spent her mornings caring for her mother, checking her temperature, making porridge, airing out the room. Their conversations were simple, mostly about the weather or what time to take the medicine. The anger that used to live between them seemed to have burned out, leaving only tiredness. One afternoon, while her mother was napping, Zanil started cleaning the dresser. The drawers were full of old scarves, faded letters, and photos from years ago. She sat on the floor, surrounded by pieces of the past. One photo made her pause. A younger version of herself, no older than 8, standing beside her mother. They were both smiling wide, holding hands, sunlight shining on their faces. Her mother looked so alive then, her eyes full of pride and promise. Zanil ran her thumb over the image, feeling something tighten in her chest. For the first time, she didn't just see the strict woman who shouted or the cold voice that made her feel small. She saw someone who had once been warm, a woman who must have loved deeply before life hardened her edges. Zanil wondered what had happened in the years between that photo and now. What pain had her mother carried all this time? What dreams had died quietly while she was busy keeping the family afloat? She remembered the stories her mother used to tell, how she left school early to help her parents, how she worked long hours selling vegetables just to keep food on the table. Pride had always been her armor. Maybe that was the only way she knew how to survive. Maybe control had been her version of love, even if it came out sharp and heavy. Zanil felt a lump rise in her throat. For years, she had told herself she'd never be like her mother, never that cold, never that hard. But looking around the small, tired room, she saw parts of herself in every corner. The same determination, the same fear of losing control, the same instinct to fix everything, even when it hurt her. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she smiled faintly, almost in disbelief at how much sense it suddenly made. We're more alike than I wanted to admit, she whispered to herself. When her mother woke later, Zanil helped her sit up and handed her a cup of tea. Their eyes met for a brief second, quiet, steady, and strangely gentle. No words were needed. There was no grand apology, no emotional speech. Just a small understanding passing between them, like a bridge being rebuilt one brick at a time. As the evening light poured through the window, Zanil looked at her mother and the photo again. The story of their lives wasn't one of villains and victims anymore. It was a story of survival, of women doing what they could with what they had. And in that moment, Zanil finally began to forgive, not just her mother, but herself too. News of Kweku's trouble came quietly, like bad weather rolling in from far away. A neighbor stopped by one morning, shifting awkwardly in the doorway as she spoke. They arrested him last night, she said. A fight over money. Some people say he owed the wrong men. Zanil stood still for a long time, the words sinking in slowly. She wasn't surprised, just sad in a tired sort of way. For years, she'd watched Kweku chase easy money, borrowing from anyone who would lend and spending faster than he earned. He'd always had charm, the kind that made people forgive him again and again. But charm runs out when the debts pile too high. Now, the same friends who used to clap him on the back were nowhere to be found. Her mother took the news hard. She blamed herself first, then Zanil. You could have talked to him, she said weakly from her bed. Zanil didn't argue. There was no point. She knew her brother's path had been set long before this moment. Still, that night she couldn't sleep. No matter how much anger she'd carried, the thought of Kweku sitting in a cold cell gnawed at her. By morning, she decided she needed to see him, not to save him, but to let go. The prison was gray and crowded. The air smelled of metal and sweat. When Zanil walked into the visiting area, She spotted him immediately, thinner now, his face rough, eyes duller. He looked up, surprised. "You came," he muttered, his voice low, almost embarrassed. She nodded and sat down across from him. "I heard what happened." He gave a bitter laugh. "You probably think I deserve it." Zanil studied him quietly. "I think you made choices," she said. "And now you're living with them. We all do, one way or another." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "They took everything, Zanil. My phone, my watch. Even my shoes." She leaned forward slightly. "Maybe it's time to stop running after things that don't last." For a long moment, he didn't speak. The usual sharpness in his voice was gone. He wasn't mocking her or trying to guilt her, just sitting there, smaller than she'd ever seen him. "You still have time to change," she said softly. "It's not too late, Kweku." He kept his eyes on the floor. "And what if I can't?" he whispered. Zanil swallowed the ache rising in her chest. "Then at least try. That's all any of us can do." When their time was up, she stood. He didn't insult her this time. Didn't call her selfish or proud. Just silence, heavy but honest. She gave him a small nod before walking away. Outside, the afternoon sun hit her face. She breathed in deeply, the air hot and dry but strangely freeing. For the first time, she didn't feel the weight of fixing him. She had done her part. Whatever came next was his choice, not her burden. And in that realization, she felt something close to peace. The weeks after Kweku's arrest felt strangely calm. For the first time in a long while, the house wasn't full of shouting or tension. The only sounds were the soft hum of the fan and Mama Thembai's slow breathing as she recovered. Her health had begun to improve little by little. She could sit up on her own now, even shuffle to the veranda to feel the morning sun. Zanil helped her with small things, combing her hair, making her favorite tea, reading out loud from old magazines. The air in the house felt lighter, though something still lingered between them, something unspoken. One afternoon, while the rain tapped gently on the roof, her mother broke the silence. "Zanil," she said quietly, her voice rough. "There's something I've been meaning to say." Zanil looked up from the laundry basket, unsure what was coming. "I've done many things wrong," her mother began. "When you left, I told myself you were ungrateful, that you'd forgotten your family. But that wasn't true." She paused to steady her voice. "You were brave. You did what I was too afraid to do." Zanil froze, her hands still on the clothes. Her mother rarely spoke this way. "I thought control was strength," Mama Thembai continued. "I thought if I kept everything tight, the money, the rules, the house, we would survive. But I hurt you instead. I let pride come before love." Her eyes glistened, and for a moment, Zanil saw not the stern woman she grew up with, but someone small and tired, stripped of her defenses. Zanil sat beside her. "Mama," she began, but her mother shook her head gently. "Let me finish," she said. "When I slapped you that day, it wasn't just anger. It was fear. I was scared you'd leave and never come back, and I made sure that's exactly what happened. I'm sorry, my child." The words hung in the air like something sacred. Zanil felt a rush of old memories, the shouting, the tears, the night she packed her things and walked out. For so long, she had carried that pain like a scar she refused to touch. But now, sitting here, hearing her mother's voice crack with regret, the anger inside her finally began to loosen. She didn't rush to speak. She just reached for her mother's hand, holding it gently. The skin was thin, the bones fragile, but the warmth was still there, the same warmth that used to comfort her as a child. "I forgive you," Zanil said softly, "but not because I've forgotten. I just don't want to carry it anymore." Her mother nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "That's all I ever hoped for," she whispered. They sat in silence, hands still joined, the sound of rain filling the room. It wasn't a perfect peace, just fragile, new, and real. But for Zanil, that was enough. Forgiveness no longer felt like surrender. It felt like setting both of them free. Months passed, and life began to find a new rhythm. The air in the house was no longer tense. Mama Thembai's health had improved. She could move around the kitchen again, humming softly as she made tea. Zanil had returned to her work at the foundation, traveling back and forth between the city and home. But this time she didn't feel pulled apart. There was peace where guilt used to live. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, Zanil mentioned her next workshop. "It's about women and money," she said. "How to build independence, even when life keeps trying to take it from you." Her mother nodded thoughtfully. Then, almost shyly, Zanil added, "You could come if you want, just to listen." Mama Thembai looked surprised. "Me?" Zanil smiled. "Yes, you. It might be good for you to hear their stories." That weekend, they traveled to the community center. The room buzzed with energy. Women of all ages sat in a circle, notebooks in hand, laughter and nervous chatter mixing in the air. When Zanil walked to the front, the room quieted. She spoke with calm confidence, her voice strong but warm. "We all carry stories about money," she began. "About family, about guilt, about what it means to survive. But sometimes, those stories aren't the truth anymore. Sometimes we get to write new ones." From the back row, Mama Thembai sat watching her daughter. She'd seen Zanil speak before, on TV, in short clips online. But this was different. Seeing her in person, commanding the room with grace and purpose, filled her with something deep and proud. She watched the women nod, some wiping their eyes as Zanil spoke about shame, control, and the strength it takes to start over. At one point, a young woman raised her hand. "My mother always told me I wasn't enough," she said, her voice shaking. "Now I'm scared I'll do the same to my daughter." Zanil paused before answering. "You can stop that cycle," she said softly. "It starts with forgiveness, not for her, but for yourself." Those words hit Mama Thembai like a quiet wave. She looked down at her hands, realizing how many times she had spoken from fear, not love. And yet, here was her daughter, turning all that pain into something beautiful, something that helped others heal. When the session ended, the women clapped and surrounded Zanil, thanking her, hugging her. From the back of the room, Mama Thembai wiped her eyes. She had always seen her daughter as the strong one, the responsible one, the one who left and never looked back. But today, she saw something else. A woman who had learned to stand on her own without bitterness, who had turned her scars into light. As they walked home together later, the sun dipping low behind them, Mama Thembai slipped her hand into Zanil's. "You've grown into someone I'm proud of," she said quietly. Zanil smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I learned from you, Mama, even the hard lessons." They didn't need to say more. The circle between them had finally closed, not perfectly, but completely. The sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as Zanil walked barefoot along the beach. The sand was cool under her feet, the waves brushing gently against her ankles. It was the kind of quiet she used to crave, the kind that didn't feel empty anymore. She breathed in deeply, the salty air filling her lungs, and for the first time, she felt completely present. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. She checked it, a few messages from her team at the foundation, a photo from one of the women celebrating her first small business loan, and a simple text from her mother. "Good night, my daughter." Zanil smiled. No long conversations, no guilt, just warmth. She scrolled further. No message from Kweku. She waited a moment, expecting a familiar sting, but it never came. The silence felt peaceful, like space she finally earned. She looked out at the ocean, endless and calm. So much of her life had been about breaking away, from her mother's control, from her brother's manipulation, from the weight of expectations. For a long time, she thought freedom meant leaving everything behind. But now she understood it differently. Freedom isn't cutting ties, she thought. It's choosing which ones to keep. The tide rolled in, washing over her footprints, carrying them away. She smiled to herself, a quiet, knowing smile. Not the kind meant for anyone else, but one that belonged only to her. The world around her felt steady, soft, alive. She turned off her phone, tucked it into her bag, and kept walking as the sky faded into dusk, each wave whispering back the peace she had finally made with her past.